Samantha stood in front of the HOA board, the air thick with tension. She had uncovered a clause that could turn everything upside down. But when she delivered the news, the leader, Charles Eastman, faltered. His confident smirk vanished, and for a moment he froze. What happened next will shock even the hardest hearts. But let's start from the beginning. Samantha Wells had always believed in doing the right thing. A middle-aged single mom, she'd worked hard to create a life centered around sustainability and self-sufficiency. Her home in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Florida was a reflection of her values: modern, green, and energy efficient. The decision to install solar panels a few years back had felt like a step toward a better future, not just for herself, but for the environment as well. She'd saved for months, carefully researching the best options, eager to contribute to the world in a small, meaningful way. The panels, neatly placed on her roof, were a quiet testament to that commitment. Life had gone on smoothly, and for a time, her solar panels were just another feature of the home she loved. That is, until the day the letter arrived. The Homeowners Association, HOA, the ever-present force in the background of suburban life, had decided her panels were an issue. They weren't visible from the street, not even close. But somehow, according to the HOA's claim, they violated the neighborhood's aesthetic guidelines. The letter was blunt: remove the panels or face legal action. The shock hit Samantha hard. She'd always prided herself on being a good neighbor, always willing to compromise and contribute to the community. But this felt like an attack on her values. Her panels weren't hurting anyone. They weren't even seen by most of the neighborhood. She felt the weight of that notice in her chest, a combination of disbelief and frustration. She had invested her time, money, and energy into doing something she believed in, and now, someone she barely knew, someone representing a faceless institution, was telling her she was wrong. Samantha wasn't one to back down easily, though. She had fought harder battles before. But this was different. This was personal. She wasn't just defending her property, she was defending her principles. Determined not to be bullied, Samantha reached out to the HOA, hoping for an explanation, hoping for a chance to reason with them. What she received in return was anything but reasonable. The board, cold and dismissive, made it clear that the issue was not up for discussion. She had to comply. Frustration and anger surged through Samantha as she reread the HOA's letter. The more she thought about it, the more she felt targeted. Why were they coming after her? Was it really about her solar panels? Or was this simply an abuse of power? Her commitment to sustainability, the very thing she believed would make her a good neighbor, seemed to have become the source of her troubles. She discovered, after a few conversations with neighbors, that a handful had filed complaints, citing the aesthetic concerns that the HOA had mentioned. But no one had ever said anything to her face. They'd been friendly before, exchanging pleasantries over the fence or during neighborhood barbecues. Now they barely made eye contact, as if some silent shift had occurred that left her standing alone in a place she once felt comfortable. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. This wasn't just about aesthetics. There was something deeper at play. Determined not to give up without a fight, Samantha dug into the HOA's governing documents. She spent hours combing through pages of regulations, seeking any loophole, anything that could help her keep her panels. Late into the night, her eyes grew tired, but she refused to stop. And then, just as she was about to give in to the weight of the task, her eyes landed on a clause she hadn't noticed before. It was tucked in a section about environmentally conscious improvements, buried beneath legal jargon. The clause stated that homeowners could maintain solar panels if they were part of an approved environmentally friendly initiative, which was exactly what Samantha had done. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a glimmer of hope. A long shot, maybe, but it was something. Samantha sat back, taking a deep breath, her mind racing. This could be the break she needed. All she had to do now was find a way to prove her case and hold on to what she had worked so hard for. Samantha walked into the HOA meeting armed with her evidence and a quiet, steely resolve. The room was charged with tension, the kind of tension you could feel in your chest. The board members, well-dressed, affluent, and influential, sat at the long table, their eyes scanning her with barely concealed disdain. These were people who expected to be obeyed, and she was about to challenge that expectation. At the head of the table sat Charles Eastman, the president of the HOA. His posture was that of someone who had never been questioned, his air of entitlement radiating through the room. He locked eyes with Samantha as she stepped forward, and a smug smile crept across his face. "You violated the aesthetic standards, Ms. Wells," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "We have no choice but to enforce the rules." The words stung, but Samantha had anticipated them. Her heart beat steady, not with fear, but with determination. She opened her folder and began to speak, her voice calm but unwavering. She laid out the facts. The regulation that protected her right to maintain the solar panels, the very regulation the HOA had conveniently overlooked. As she spoke, she could feel the board's collective attention shift, their certainty beginning to crack. Eastman's expression faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "That regulation is outdated and irrelevant," he shot back, his voice now laced with irritation. "You don't have a legal leg to stand on." The room grew colder, the board members exchanging subtle glances. They weren't used to being challenged, but Samantha wasn't backing down. She pressed on, her words sharp and deliberate. She spoke of her investment, the years of saving and planning that had gone into making her home energy efficient. She detailed her choices to live sustainably, to reduce her carbon footprint, and the financial burden of removing the panels. Each point she made seemed to weigh heavier in the room, like a slow realization that perhaps they hadn't considered the bigger picture. Eastman's arrogant smirk began to fade. The unease among the other board members was palpable. Samantha could feel it. She was getting through to them. With each word, she chipped away at their certainty, and in that moment she knew this fight was far from over. It took weeks for the board to respond, but when they did, it was a bombshell. The HOA had backed down. Citing the rare regulation, they agreed to cover the full cost of restoring the solar panels, as long as Samantha signed a non-disclosure agreement. They had no choice, but the price was steep. The satisfaction, however, was undeniable. The justice system had worked, this time. Samantha's victory wasn't just about the solar panels. It was about standing up for herself, for her rights, and for the greater good. The community now saw her not as the rebellious troublemaker, but as a hero who challenged an unjust system. As for the HOA, they couldn't forget this defeat. And while Samantha's panels were reinstated, she had learned something far more valuable. The true power lies in knowledge and the will to fight for what is right.